Okay, welcome to the second one. We're going to look at list and list patterns. What we're going to just explore is the square bracket and the colon are called constructors for lists. Let's have a look what that might mean. If we come to our simulated terminal window and we type this, it will construct a list with that single member. We can do it with a sequence of terms on an empty, and you will notice it will build it. This is actually the way that Haskell understands what we're doing in that particular way. Let's have a look at a sequence of them. So I can do a pre-existing list. And you will notice it prefixes it. That's a simple way of constructing and building up lists using the colon. You can obviously, this is obviously an empty list, using these two terms in this particular way. You notice you always do it in this direction. You can't take an empty list and postfix it. It will have a problem. The sequence is out. Okay, so that's a very, very simple concept. As we say, the bracket, the bracket and the colon are called constructors for lists. There are other kinds of functions available to us. There is a Prelude has a function called a head, and it essentially lifts out the first item. So let's have a look at some examples. What we'll do is we'll write out a definition over here in our main, and we'll use our main version in a moment. So if we just create a temporary if we write this, there's your array, there's your first item, and there's your result. X colon XS, and if that's your input, your output. So if I use it over here, main dot head, and I pass it a list, correctly, would probably help. It'll give me the first item, 3, 4, 5, for example. So what it actually does is it splits. It grabs the first X and returns that which is over here, which is the 3, but the remainder are called X's, and XS is, if you like, a way of saying X's. And also note that actually we're only interested in the first item, so why not replace this with just a wildcard and see if it works. And let's add some more values in here, and it should lift 34, and it does. So that's an alternative way. X is the only value, the result we're interested in. The remainder of the list we just replace with a wildcard. There's an alternative way of doing it, which is with a tail. And the tail, I'll just type it in here so you can see it. So if I pass it a wildcard, and then I pass it XS's, it will give me this back. So if I use it over here, I go main, tail, and I pass it a list, 34, 45, type it correctly, might help. It gives me 45. Let's add 7, 78. What does it do now? An 8. What does it do now? Notice it's taking the remainder. So the head lifts the first item, the tail lifts the remaining items in that particular list. So these are inbuilt Prelude functions. Over here I can just explicitly draw out the pattern for you to see. I just wanted to show you that with a Prelude's inbuilt function, it does exactly the same thing. If I just remove that so there's no ambiguity, I have my own. I can just run it straight as if you were putting it straight into the console window. These are the Prelude functions, exactly the same. The definitions over here just help make things clearer. So let's have a look at a function. Let's have a look at another function. We're going to define it in this way. Type-wise, we have a list of integers, and the result will be in the form of an integer. Let's define some of the conditions. The first is if you have an empty, you will return -1. Let's have a look at another one. In every other case, you will be supplying essentially a head and all the remaining items of a list. Note that the colon between is what actually tells you we've got a list here. And what you're returning is the absolute of the X. Okay, so let's run it. Now, because I've put it into main, I'm going to run that in main. I'm going to pass it a list and see what it does. Takes the first value. Let's make a -56 as the first item, and it finds the absolute. Let's give it a completely empty list, gives us -1. So this shows you a very simple pattern, and setting up a very simple pattern which allows us to find the absolute value of the first item of a list.